Hey guys, I'm Philip Molina, and this is a review of Spiderman Homecoming. And this is me testing out a new format that we haven't actually done much of on this channel, but you guys asked for it actually in our poll. You can check out our poll in the description, by the way. It's movie reviews. Now, one of the reasons I've hesitated before is because I think that often movie reviews of the properties you and I love, they feel very surface level. They don't treat the movies as much more than popcorn fluff. I mean, maybe disagree with me if you'd like, but I think these films are as worthy of film analysis and deeper critique as all those art house flicks that win all the Oscars. So in these reviews, if you like them and we keep making them, I think we'd often talk about the choices made by the story of the film and the character arcs and how those choices affected the film's overall quality. If that ain't up your alley, that's cool. There's plenty of other reviews out there for you to check out. And if you're looking for Easter eggs and references, that is totally cool too. They are definitely an entire aspect of the movie-going experience, so that's what our breakdown video is for. Check that out. But all right, let's get to it. Cast and characters. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't still acknowledge our lead actors in this piece. Tom Holland, in my opinion, just gave us the most authentic Peter Parker to date. Note that I'm saying Peter, not Spider-Man, because that's what stood out. His portrayal of the guy under the mask and the kid he really is. Also, I mean, no shit he's gonna come off as more authentically youthful. Tom Holland was a teenager when he was cast as Spider-Man. In the movie, Betty jokes that Spider-Man's probably like 30. And if she's talking about the last two guys, she's probably pretty close to right. They were both almost 30 when they were cast. Now, why am I so obsessively emphasizing this youthfulness here? Well, it's a little known fact that the most profitable superhero character in the world is Spider-Man. When it comes to toys, movies, games, comics, all of it added up, Spider-Man licensing outperforms every other character by hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And the reason behind that is because the main consumers of licensed Spider-Man merchandise are children. So I'm not saying Spider-Man needs to be youthful because kids buy a lot of his toys. I'm saying Spider-Man is the toy that kids already want the most because he's authentically youthful. And yes, sure, his mask is also very recognizable and his colors are nice and bright and they probably activate some part of a kid's mushy little brain. But more importantly, the character is a child who kids can imagine themselves becoming. Like when I was 13, I loved Batman, I still do, but I couldn't fantasize about waking up tomorrow and being a billionaire in my 30s and having been trained by the League of Assassins. And I didn't want to hope that I'd become an orphan. Other kids liked Superman, but they couldn't imagine waking up tomorrow and being an alien who's also in his 30s. But you know what I could dream of? Waking up tomorrow and for some reason or another, suddenly having some extra powers that I could use to beat up my bully and suddenly be really good at football or basketball or wrestling. Becoming like Spider-Man is what every teen dreams of. So Marvel and Tom Holland nail it here because the kids that sit in the theater anywhere near this kid's age actually feel like that could be them in their own little mushy escapist fantasy brain. This is also why one of the fastest gaining properties on Spider-Man is Harry Potter, every kid's dream, to be a little British boy. And sticking to this feeling of relating to this kid and the authenticity on display, that is why Michael Keaton nailed it as the Vulture, and why, in my opinion, the Vulture character really works. Keaton is totally threatening as a villain, but he also manages to be threatening in a way that many of us have actually felt in real life, as the girl you like's dad. And that's not the only thing that makes you feel like this is a real human being that could really exist. The creative team, plus Keaton himself, designed the MCU movie's first truly authentic, average Joe American blue-collar villain. Now, I don't care one bit about who you voted for in the election, but every post-election analysis was about who connected with blue-collar voters better. People don't only attribute Trump's win to this demographic, but also the popularity of Bernie Sanders and his platform in the primaries. So we can't deny right now in 2017, the blue-collar worker is having a bit of a cultural moment. They felt ignored for decades now, and even staying out of politics. When it comes to Marvel movies, they kind of have been ignored there. So here, we didn't just get a blue-collar hero in Spider-Man, a kid who's never even been on a plane before, but we got a blue-collar villain who just loves his family, and after a string of bad luck, he made some bad choices. Who can't relate to that? My own family is full of examples of that same kind of person. And just like my family members, I don't hate Michael Keaton's Vulture, I get him. And that's really rare for a villain. And not only is he relatable and layered, his arc is just as interesting as our protagonist. You've got the blue-collar guy, typical of the working class, seeing his career vanish, mostly due to advancements in technology. So, in a good bit of irony here, he decides to reject that narrative and use technology to change his story. He's not gonna be a victim or a statistic. He's gonna turn the system around for him and his family. That's a lot more nuanced than a bad guy who wants to make a blue laser thing turn into a weird angry sky cloud that's gonna kill everyone because he's mad. Okay, now one criticism you might have, and I maybe will give you, is that this villain portrayal and Spider-Man and their conflict and all of that stuff, it's pretty small scale. And if you don't like that, I get it. You want something more intense from these films, but personally, I loved that about this movie, with some exceptions that I will bring up later. This movie is smaller in scale than the other MCU films because that's the freaking point. The movie's opening images show us Toomes and his crew cleaning up from the aftermath of Avengers 1. And I think Eric's breakdown dives into exactly what moment caused this particular destruction, but to me, this is doing a really great job of setting up the entire setting and arc of this story. Like, think about this. The rubble from an Avengers movie, the literal garbage that they left behind, that stuff, when you shift perspective on it, it is enough to generate the entirety of this Spider-Man's movie's plot and villain motivation. Their trash is literally this guy's treasure. Also, moments later when you see that Happy, who is essentially like an assistant level to Iron Man, even he is too busy dealing with MCU level of events for Peter's phone calls, or even replying to a freaking little text message from the kid. So you can't tell me it was an accident that this movie kept things small and street level. That's what they wanted to do. They positioned the entire rest of the MCU as a point of perspective for understanding Peter's world. And again, you may not have wanted a street level superhero movie. Here's why I did. The MCU films take place on this hugely epic scale, but only the Netflix shows have really made you feel what it's like to actually live in the MCU, like as a human being, on your street. This movie decides that street level stories shouldn't only be because you don't have the huge budget. These stories are just as worthy of being told on the big screen. In some ways, it's actually a spiritual successor to Ant-Man, because our two leads see the Avengers as we do, larger than life, way bigger than they are. And sure, maybe it's not even a total coincidence that that's the perspective of the two heroes who are based on tiny insects. Also, getting specific about the literal setting for a second, the high school. I can barely remember the high school scenes from the previous Spider-Man movies, but this movie, it felt like its home base was the high school. And here's why that's important and why I think it worked. Director John Watts wanted to make a movie that felt like the movies that resonated with him when he was a teenager, and he felt like he was seeing his own dramas and stresses on screen. And the best of those movies were the John Hughes films. Just like how Logan had a quick glimpse of the movie Shane to evoke the feeling that this wasn't just a superhero movie, it was also an old, tragic Western. This movie shows a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, a John Hughes movie, to evoke that this is another story about just a really crazy moment in an average teen's life. So in choosing to make the high school almost a living, breathing character that feels realistic, Watts really minds that John Hughes vibe. I mean, this movie could have just as easily been set in the Breakfast Club universe as in the MCU. And the key to that vibe was a high school that didn't feel like it was full of cliches and stereotypes. Was Flash Thompson much of a bully threat? No, probably not. But he is a lot more like Rodolfo, the annoying kid who would try to make my life hell but was also kind of dumb. So yeah, he's Peter's Rodolfo. Ned is what your friends were really like. Everyone at this school was actually really nerdy, but they were really real. I mean, how perfect were those terrible morning announcements? I had the exact same ones, but they forgot to make the music way too loud. And it was always ska music. Oh, I just aged myself. Also, real quick actually, Peter's relationship with Aunt Bay was so damn sweet, and it's basically the relationship between Molly Ringwald and her dad in Pretty in Pink, another John Hughes classic. Okay, moving on to the story. The things that happen in this film, the threat level, the action scenes, and the personal dilemmas, there's another reason why I love the choice to keep them small in scale. And it's also connected to the idea to make this feel like a John Hughes movie, which was Marvel daddy Kevin Feige's idea, by the way. And that reason that I love it is because it's true to being 15 years old. Look back at the things that happen in this movie. Any of those moments would of course be the most epic thing to ever happen in a 15-year-old's life. Like, I used to help kids write their college essays, and I guarantee you that just being late to the academic decathlon in DC would totally be their answer to a time when I had to persevere the most. So as much as it can manage to be relatable, the events of the story feel like fairly authentic teen life. Being overstretched and overstressed. Wishing you could skip the part of high school where you have to grow up and just wanting to be doing all the cool adult stuff already. Wanting the girl and then blowing it and then it not getting magically fixed. You lose the girl. And that girl, she's also got her own baggage too. I'm gonna say actually, I think the other Spider-Man movies, they might have had better action sequences. But I think part of the issue was they had to tell a different story. So in terms of making your movie interesting, you take a character who is in some form of stasis, and you make something kind of crazy happen to him, and then you put him in a new environment. Well, for them, the crazy thing was the spider bite and the superpowers. So their movie has to be about the changes and differences from being a normal teen. Look how far away from a normal teen's life this kid's story has gone. Spider-Man Homecoming didn't have to worry about that. It got to tell a different story. This is after the spider bite and even after Civil War. So don't ask me exactly what year it's happening in because that got really confusing. I think Eric tries to figure it out in his video. Instead, this is now like, okay, the spider bite is old news. You're back at school. So now, tell me an interesting story. And it doesn't become about the difference between being a regular kid and a superpowered kid. It becomes about the vast world of difference that exists between your perception of a hero and the reality of being a freaking ultra mega Avengers level hero. Another way to put it is that origin movies ask the question of what happens when you become super, but this movie instead asks what makes you the hero. And trust me when I say that most directors would rather answer the second question, diving into who their character really is, and not just how they change when a super spider spits in them. It's actually why one of the best runs of Superman comics in recent history is the American Alien story by Max Landis. It's not obsessed with the circumstances of Superman's origin. It instead focuses on how weird it is to try to be a normal human being and a normal human teen and an alien and a freak, but like the rest of us, but also different. Actually, check that out if you get a chance. So did it work? Here's where we know if the portrayal of Peter Parker, aiming small with his story, but making it feel really freaking true, worked. If you were having a really fun time watching it, laughing along with him while he's in school and just enjoying the film, and then suddenly, when Peter's stuck under rubble, if suddenly you were like, wait, am I kind of like tearing up here? Then yes, it worked. That means you really buy that this kid is a real freaking kid. Like literally a child who is hurt. And so even though it's smaller than, you know, Star-Lord versus a freaking planet, your heart actually feels it way more. And it actually breaks a little when he says, somebody help, I'm stuck. Oh. So maybe that worked for you, maybe it didn't, but it definitely worked for me. His struggle felt totally real, and that is way more important to me than the quality of the CGI fight scenes. But here's my criticism, I kind of referenced it earlier. This is a bit of a double-edged sword we have here. That very real moment, that small-scale threat of being trapped, it worked, I felt it, but you know what I didn't feel? The threat when Peter was stuck on the outside of a plane, 1,000 feet up in the air, and it's about to crash into the ground. It's a major action sequence, and it didn't really resonate for me. And honestly, it didn't feel that threatening. But I gotta wonder if that's just because Feige put it out there that he was looking for writers and directors that could create a great movie about a teen's life, and not looking for people who nail it with huge CGI action set pieces. And if I had to pick between those two, I'd definitely make the character pick every time. But sure, it'd be nice to nail both. Also, I'm gonna mention that the trailers did not do us any favors in making those action set pieces land. The plane and the big ferry sequence were both heavily given away in the trailers. And I know you might find this ironic coming from me about seeing too much in trailers, but keep in mind, I don't dictate what goes in a trailer, I just comment on it. I very much prefer less given away. One of my favorite trailers in recent memory used no footage from the actual show with Jessica Jones, or it didn't really give anything major away, like that first Force Awakens trailer. And my breakdowns of those trailers were some of my favorite ones I've ever done. Okay, so I'll say I like this movie a lot, and it's important to remember, it just feels right for where Peter is right now, at this moment in his story. Sure, he might become more like Tony Stark in the future, and he's actually gonna be in frickin' Infinity War where his story gets ridiculously epic. I think he's going to space. Like as of now, he's never been on a plane, but I think he's going to space. But right now, it's perfect for a 15-year-old superhero. I mean, I might have bought if the story was about a PE coach that embarrasses you in front of the class just because you asked if you could split up the mile run over a couple of different days, which is a totally reasonable request, Coach Miller. Anyway, I'm glad John Watson team took Tony Stark's advice about staying close to the ground, because that is where Spider-Man works best. He's just like one of your friends who lives in your neighborhood. Okay, now I'm trying to come up with a fun name for the sequel of this movie. I think the third one has gotta be Graduation, but what the hell do you call the middle one? Final exam? Midterms? I don't know, let me know if you have any ideas for that. Or more likely, you can respond to any of the points I brought up in this video. We'll talk more about it in the comments. Also, let me know if you like these reviews. It's a new thing we're trying. It was your idea. And if you feel like this review actually made some good points, I would really appreciate it if you shared it around with some of your friends. I think it's our duty to raise the discussion around these badass nerdy properties. I've been Philip Molina. Have a good one. Bye-bye.